Let's talk a little bit about basketball. We kind of mentioned a little bit of the Clippers. And the Clippers are staring down the barrel of a Oklahoma City Thunder-esque 2015-2016. Why do I say that? Well, Blake Griffin and Chris Paul, two of their best players, like Durant and Westbrook, are in this weird free agency limbo come next season, right? So both players, one, Chris Paul, a little bit older. He's going to be 33 by the time his contract expires completely. Blake Griffin, still in the prime of his career, even with the injury worries that happened. His quad, which acted up in the playoffs last season, Chris Paul's hand, and it kind of derailed the season. Once again, the Clippers just couldn't get over the hump, whether it had to do with play itself, Blake Griffin's play itself in the postseason, injuries, all things considered, they just couldn't get over the hump. And that's something that's interesting because there's so many different scenarios. Like last year when I looked back on our clips about what's going to happen with the Thunder, our immediate reaction was if the Thunder put up a major contest against the NBA, make it to the finals, or like what they did, beat the Spurs, go on and give the Warriors a run for their money, Kevin Durant would be an idiot not to stay. Well, everyone was wrong. They were. He went out and joined the Golden State Warriors. So you live, you learn, you use history. Does history repeat itself? Of course it does. So if the Clippers go out, finally get over the hump, make it to the Western Conference Finals, I don't think it means that Chris Paul and Blake Griffin are safe in the Clippers organization.
Yeah.
We know a couple things. Doc Rivers constantly says, one, it's not Blake's fault. Two, it's that Blake Griffin is not going to be traded. However, that mentality will change depending on the course of the season. The Clippers get off to a rough start, or aren't contending, not competing as well as they should be as a top 3-4 seed in the Western Conference, 30, 40 games in, trade deadline comes up, that could pass, the end of the season comes up, depending on where they finish. So on top of that, you have a couple different options. One is you keep Blake Griffin, you let CP3 go in some form of trade at the deadline or end of the year, and get hopefully draft picks or something in return, and you rebuild. You flip that, CP3 stays, you let him live out the rest of his career in Los Angeles, give him a 5-year contract, renegotiate, get something in return for Blake Griffin. Possibly the Thunder would be interested in a Blake Griffin if Russell Westbrook is going to stay long-term. Or you let both walk, you fire Doc Rivers, and you restart completely.
Yeah, and I think that if Kevin Durant's trade didn't happen, we would be having a different conversation. I think that will go down as a historic moment in basketball where an MVP player who has the ability to change any team opted to go to a team that many people considered the easy option because he wanted to win a championship. I see Chris Paul in a very similar situation. I think Chris Paul is one of the most gifted point guards we've ever seen. And they squandered a chance when they lost to the Houston Rockets, a chance where they could have went on to push the Golden State Warriors and potentially have made it. And it would have changed this whole conversation, but it didn't happen. So rather than sitting here and saying, what if? Oh, we could get everyone fit and ready. Well, as we've talked about before, you're rarely going to get everyone fit and ready. So if you don't have a team that has the depth and the ability to withstand players going down, to withstand certain things changing, then that's not the team that's going to get you to that level of success that you want to get to. Blake Griffin being traded, I think, is a more likely scenario than Chris Paul. But if I was Chris Paul, I think if this season doesn't go the way he wants it to go and they don't get over that hump, why would he not look elsewhere? Why does loyalty come into the question here when you've seen a player like Kevin Durant, who's given 8 years, I believe, to OKC, taking them to the point where they were considered the best team in the West last year, but still lost to a Golden State Warriors team that had more depth, that had more of a winning mentality, that had the belief that they could go on to the finals again. And Kevin Durant just simply decided that this team couldn't take him where he wanted to go individually in his career. So you mentioned Doc Rivers. That's true. Doc Rivers might not want to trade Blake Griffin. He's said it. Many a times he doesn't. But what happens if Blake Griffin wants to be traded? What happens if he realizes that this team are not going to gift him the level of potential that he can possibly reach? What about the Celtics? There was talk of him potentially going to the Celtics this year.
I think the Celtics changes because of the Al Horford pickup.
Yeah, it changes
but
now.
I wouldn't, of course, rule it out. They have a lot of. It's who would Blake Griffin get? What would you get in return for Blake Griffin? You want assets. You're not going to get a superstar for superstar deal out of that. It's technically a wash. So the Thunder and the Celtics, of course, always come up as players with assets, role players, their versatility, depth, draft picks, all those things, money that can come into the organization. The thing I wanted to mention with Chris Paul is, as you mentioned, why would Chris Paul not consider at least leaving? Well, there's technically 3 destinations where Chris Paul I could very easily see ending up. However, I do believe he will finish on the Clippers. That would be my gut instinct. I think he likes Los Angeles. I think he has a very good relationship with Doc Rivers. It seems like that at least. And I think he enjoys who he's playing around right now, the Jamal Crawfords and J.J. Redicks of the world, and DeAndre Jordan especially. The Knicks, the Cavaliers, and the Spurs. And it's pretty easy to tell why. For one, the LeBron and Chris Paul relationship, wanting a ring really badly, of course, has a major effect on this. Moving Kyrie Irving over to the 2 as a pure scoring guard instead of ever having to worry to pass in the first place.
What a team.
On a team with LeBron James and Kevin Love. Kevin Durant went to the Warriors. Of course, Chris Paul can go to the Cavaliers. The Knicks, Derrick Rose is, if it doesn't pan out for the Knicks, Derrick Rose doesn't sign long-term contract with the New York. Chris Paul, who is also very good friends with Carmelo Anthony and has expressed interest in playing with Carmelo Anthony, on top of the fact that 5 years ago, before the Lakers trade, before the Clippers deal, all that, there was Chris Paul's very interested level of the interview where he said he wanted to go. Not the interview, where ESPN was reporting that he wanted to go play in New York. It was one of the markets he was interested in. I would have loved Chris Paul if he came to New York. I still love Chris Paul regardless. And the Spurs, interestingly enough, a pure point guard in Greg Popovich's offense.
Tony Parker's getting on a bit.
Tony Parker, but they actually are not that dissimilar in age. Like,
yeah.
Tony Parker is getting on a little bit.
Yeah.
But just it could be a place where if you of course want to put yourself in contention for a ring, the team like a Spurs is always a team that's going to be that could be of interest for that team. I do think the Cavs is actually a very, very likely scenario outside of just staying with the Clippers, because it does make sense if they have the money. That's a team that would be extremely fun to watch, just because Kyrie Irving and Chris Paul in a backcourt would be something special.
Well, when you look at Chris Paul fitting into another team, most of these teams that are already of quality enough to go on and win the NBA already have their set point guard, like Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry. You don't imagine him moving to the 2, although I probably could imagine him doing it, but they're already set with their system. So the only other team that you're thinking about here, or 2 teams probably, are the Spurs and the Cavs. If you go in, you probably see him as a direct replacement for Tony Parker. I think that he would fit in well to that team. But he wouldn't upset the dynamic in the Cavs, because Kyrie Irving, of any of the point guards we've mentioned, I think is more comfortable moving to the 2 than anyone else, because he, as we know, is an infamous scorer. He technically does play, because LeBron runs the point. So, LeBron runs the point when he wants to run it. So, the only other question I wanted to pose, probably to the outraged Clipper fans, of which probably Dan is one of them in the comments, is if you're going to get Chris Paul to stay, similar to what you should be doing to a LeBron or a Steph Curry, what are you offering Chris Paul? Are you going to say to Chris Paul, I'm going to bring in a superstar? Because let's face it, the Clippers, when they put out their best starting 5, where do you rank them amongst the NBA and the best teams? They're not better than the Cavs. They're not better than Golden State Warriors. They're not better than the Spurs. They're even not, I don't think they're that much better than the Raptors, right, when you face them up against each other.
I think they're better than the Raptors, but
I don't know. I mean, they're starting 5. Obviously, the Raptors are in an easier conference, but I'm thinking about it. They failed last year, right? Chris Paul goes down, I understand it. They failed the year before against the Rockets. So, yeah, on paper, they're better, but when they play collectively, Toronto go to a finals in their conference. It's not as complicated as it is in the Western Conference when you have to face off against teams like Golden State and the Spurs. But when you're talking to Chris Paul on a personal note, you need to offer him a superstar coming in. You need to offer him another superstar in order to compete, to keep him there. You need to say, we need to bring in someone else who's going to potentially take this team to the next level.
Not just a superstar. You have to offer him a superstar and a plan.
A plan to go along with it. But imagine someone that fits with Blake Griffin, with DeAndre Jordan. Like the similar move like a Kevin Durant. If Kevin Durant went to the Clippers, it's a different conversation.
I think it's time for It took me a long time to realize that. I think it's time for Blake to move on. Not possible for no money in terms of what? What about the money?
Yeah, it's replacing Blake Griffin.
Blake wouldn't be in the equation. And you got guys like, again, this is where I get really concerned with the Clippers is Austin Rivers. And everyone knows my feelings on him. Is like the 5th highest paid guy on the payroll. He's over $10 million a year. You can get a lot more value for $11 million a year in the NBA than Austin Rivers. You can. So, but they still got Jamal Crawford, who's the dopest man alive, and that's all that matters. Get Jamal Crawford a ring. Get Jamal Crawford like 4 rings. He deserves them. He's one of the best 6 men in the